everyone. This is update for September 14, 2024, day 934 of the war, end of the date update. Also catch up for September 13 and 12. As promised, I'm gonna start with the fiscal situation update in the US, and I'm gonna do then a little bit of macro, specifically on China. And then I'm going to switch to the situation on battlefield in Ukraine. So first, let's look at the situation fiscal U.S. Sorry, let's look at the U.S. fiscal situation. So the new update came out from Treasury, U.S. Treasury Department, and it shows pretty negative picture. I think everyone who follows this already probably seen it. It looks pretty ugly. As you can see, this is for August. So the revenue or tax collection, or basically all sort of collections, so revenue for the government, let's put this for U.S. federal government, was 307 billion, and the expenses were 687. So basically, the expenses are more than 2 times larger than your revenue, which is obviously not a good sign at all by any means. And then that's why you have a huge deficit. So I would say very straightforward situation. At the same time, this is just 1 month. But let's look actually for that reason. Let's look cumulatively what's going on since the beginning of the fiscal year in the US, which starts on October 1st. So as you can see here, total revenue roughly 4.4, total expenses 6.3, right? So deficit is roughly 1.9 trillion, and given that there is 1 more month, so it looks very likely that total deficit is going to be roughly 2 trillion, probably a little bit more, but for simplicity, let's call it 2 trillion. What this really means in terms of deficit, for those who are not familiar, so basically you spend, it's very similar actually how you probably would live if you live this way. So you have revenues that are smaller than your expenses. So what do? You borrow, and this deficit is a difference, and the way you sort of, let's say, bring it into existence, meaning that you can spend that money, is you borrow the difference, which is deficit is another way to say difference. So you borrow it. So roughly, U.S. federal government, because there's also borrowing on the state and local level, so there's multiple levels of borrowing. At the same time, that borrowing below federal level in the U.S. is extremely constrained. So state and local governments cannot really borrow that much. The growth of the debt in the U.S. is coming from the federal government for the most part. So what happens is the U.S. government borrows 2 trillion in a year, and how does this work then in a financial system? So U.S. government, the way borrowing happening is U.S. government issues U.S. government debt. It's called treasuries in the U.S. and in different countries it's called different, but it's all governmental debt. And I think in the UK it's called gilts. In Germany it's called bonds and so on. So they have very specific names, but the essence of all of this debt instruments is that this is an instrument where a government says, okay, I borrow money, I give you in return note that guarantees that I'm going to pay you back plus some interest, and that's all it is. So when someone gets this instrument from let's say from the U.S. government in this case, it's called Treasury. So it's viewed by the market as uh, nearly money. So it's called basically money good, and so then this instrument in the banking system is viewed as asset, not as you would think liability, but it's actually viewed as asset. And because it's viewed as an asset, then banking system then can, based off that, because they have more assets, so then they can basically issue more debt to whoever, right? Generally speaking, and so this allows this 2 trillion, basically through banking system and non-banking system. The whole how it all flows through the financial system is, I don't think anyone perfectly knows, because there is banking, there is non-banking system, exactly how it's all intertwined. As I stated, nobody perfectly knows. But the end product of this sort of processing mechanism, which is a financial system, that it produces more debt. So it takes this 2 trillion of, sort of call it assets or fake assets, and based on that, they land at some multiple. Also, nobody knows for sure. Typically, in a banking system, normal multiple is 10 times. So when you get of $10 or whatever of money from the client, then you can lend out up to 10 times more. So let's say $100. I'm not sure. I don't. There are probably constraints on this type of security, so I don't think that the system produces, another 20 trillion of debt out of this. But there is some multiple again. Not sure. So that multiple, that debt goes then into broader economy, and that really helps to generate GDP. And so this is how it sort of, and then that generated GDP is distributed as income to everybody, every person, and then government then collects taxes for everyone, and so that really goes back as a sort of as revenue. So as you can see, it's kind of like a closed loop in some way. So you emit more debt, it's turned into even more debt in the private economy. That generates more GDP, then that generates more tax collections for the government, and so the government then collects that as revenue. So this is kind of how it works in ideal world. Inherently, this system is not stable. So I sort of probably sounded a little bit like it's perfect virtuous system that's stable and so on, which it is not, because it requires ever more large amount of debt to be issued, and there are structural issues that's coming out of it, because the debt that's, let's say, government borrows is extremely wasteful, is rarely used for productive purposes. Almost by accident, it's used for productive purposes. In most cases, it's just waste in the economy, so it's adding to expense. It's a drag on the economy and society as a whole. And then also all of this debt that's being issued, then also derivative from this original governmental debt, eventually it also becomes less and less efficient. And it's becoming a problem for the economy. Now, I'll show you in a minute how it actually works. But the whole point is this deficit that I just explained, this 2 trillion, this is reflected in this government debt that I showed, which is, as of September 10, was 35.3. I didn't update for the most recent one. It's something plus minus similar. And GDP is 27.4 trillion. That's 23, probably larger by right now. So that's why how this whole, let's say, three figures are interconnected into one system. But actually, let's move and look how it actually works in terms of when I stated that this system is not virtuous and it's actually inherently unstable system, then eventually it hits situation when you really need to do something about the amount of that, because it works by ever increasing amount of that. So it's in some ways you can say that's a pyramid scheme, and which it is, but except it's a legal pyramid scheme. But let me explain how it actually works in hopefully a simple example. So I took from the same statement data for revenues. This is receipts, so basically government, also all government revenues, and then outlays are expenses, and deficit or surplus is a difference. Except I made a little mistake. I showed deficits as negative in 2020 fiscal 2024, and I didn't fix that in 2023. So this might be a little bit misleading. So there's small error in terms of visual presentation, not in the meaning of the numbers that I will show you later. But let's go back to this. So you have revenues, and we take the same period in 2023 relative to 2024. So we compare, as I say, apples to apples, and it's relevant comparison, right? So what do we do is revenues in fiscal 2024, roughly 4.4 trillion. In 23, we'll say roughly 4 trillion. So the difference is increase in governmental revenue, so tax collections of roughly $420 billion, right? So this is increase in governmental revenues. This is what I explained before, where eventually, government issues this 2 trillion of debt. It's turned into even more debt and goes into the economy, generates more GDP. And then in turn, that generates more taxes, increase in taxes, right? So this is that net increase in taxes from one year to another, and by issuing that 1.9 trillion of that. So it's not quite 2, because this is only for 11 months, not fully 12 months, but hopefully that makes sense in terms of idea. So you're generating extra $420 billion of extra revenue or tax collections for the government by issuing 322 billion of debt. So what this really says is it's still positive purely just from the number perspectives. Qualitatively, it's negative, but for purely this is, if you are looking at this as a government bureaucrat, you'll say, okay, well, if I issued 372 billion of that, I receive later 420 billion dollars in revenue, in extra revenue. So that's net positive, right? Because 420 minus 372, it gives you positive number, and I show this of 46 billion, right? So, and in simplified way, what this really means, if we divide 420 by 372, it's going to be $1.13. So what this really means, for if you issue $1 of that, you get in return eventually $1.13. So basically you're getting extra 13 cents. So it just purely from this perspective, mechanistically, again, going back to this, that this is just mechanistic view, which is how bureaucrats are looking at everything. They don't take ever qualitative perspective, because that they simply not capable of doing it. But is actually the most important part in all of this. And that's why this decision that looks sort of on paper, on numbers, looks okay, is actually a terrible decision that leads eventually to difficult situation in the economy, and either in deflationary or inflationary collapse. That's the end point. It just the passes, meaning to collapse, are two different ways, either deflation or inflation. So, for example, the Great Depression in the U.S. in 2933, and really it actually was longer, was example of deflationary collapse. This time around, it appears that we're going to go inflationary path, and that's why people say we're going to go through stagflation. So going back to this, so it looks on paper is as if it's still positive. $1.13. You put in $1, returning a little bit more. So important part here to look at this is that average interest that's paid on all of this 35. Actually, I took actually average amount of that, because it's simplified. It's because it wouldn't be fair to take amount outstanding as of right now, because it's on average amount of that. So US started it with 30, I think 3.4, something like that, and ended, let's say, 35.3. So this is amount of so the average somewhere 34 trillion plus there. So giving that how much was paid in interest, which is I think 840 billion for this 11 months, that gives us 2.45% average interest on the debt outstanding. So I just want to keep in mind this 245 as a key number. And so let's say if interest goes on this, so basically what it says, as long as you borrow at 245, return on that borrowing is still positive. You're getting 113, right? Where you borrow $1 at 245, and you're getting 113. So you still, it's a positive outcome nominally, as I stated. So if U.S. average interest rate goes to 2.6%, you roughly become, I put it here, $1. It's actually like 99 cents. So basically, it doesn't make sense at that point to borrow and increase to borrow, because the more you borrow, your revenues go down, and you literally going into death spiral very quickly. So as you can see, in terms of interest rate, US is not that far from a death spiral, just from 245 to 2.6. And so to explain, and this probably explains why interest rates are going down, and why Federal U.S. Central Bank is taking interest rates down, because I showed you that 2.6 is the maximum, and at that point it's still already going to be negative, so it has to be a little bit lower than that. Let's say 245 that it is current. So the whole interest rate curve, which is curve, this is I'm showing you current curve in the U.S. So this is different in interest rates that U.S. government pays for different duration of that. So for, let's say, for 30 years, if U.S. government borrows for 30 years from you, it pays roughly 4%. If it borrows for short term, for months, 2 months, it's a little bit more than 5%. Hopefully everybody understands. So on average, this whole thing needs to be, let's say, less than 2.6%, and ideally 2.5 or less. So in order for this whole thing to be on average, you need significantly interest rates significantly down, or U.S. is spiraling. Fiscal situation, the whole financial system spirals out of control. And that's probably what we see in terms of the big move. Where it's going is U.S. simply as economy, as a whole system, not talking just government, but as a whole system, it cannot tolerate this interest rates the way whatever they are, but they are significantly more than 2.6%. As you can see, there is nothing, nowhere here where there is anywhere close to 2.6%. The lowest, as you can see, this 3-year and 5-year borrowing, it's a little bit less than 3.5%, but still quite a bit far from 2.6. And the way actually U.S. Treasury finances is actually they issue mostly short-term debt, so it'll be like 3 months, 6 months, up to a year included. So that's all, as you can see, quite a bit far away from 2.6. So going back to all of this is that U.S. fiscal situation is becoming more and more getting to the point where something needs to be done, basically, with the deficits. It doesn't mean it needs to be done tomorrow or in 2 months or 3 months. That's not the case. But whoever's going to be in the U.S. elected as a president for next term will have to deal with fiscal debt crisis. Don't know, in 2 years, in a year, in 3 years, but at some point, whoever that person is, that person will not escape dealing with probably the biggest problem you can have. And from that perspective, whatever the promises actually given during the election cycle right now are essentially useless, because these people will be beholden to this situation. They will not be able to do whatever they promise. They will have to do what the situation what situation demands from them at that time, in 2 years or whatever it's going to be, 3 years. But that's sort of where the situation is heading in the US. Now, hopefully, if there are any questions, I'll try to answer. You can shoot me email if I was not very clear or something. If you have questions about this. The other sort of country I'm going to switch is China, which is the main rival of the US, and things there are also going in a negative direction. So there is a bunch of data came out, specifically starting with fixed asset investment. As you can see, it's going down prior month. So this is for August. July was 3.6. If you look in prior, so it's for July, the June was 3.9. So as you can see, Chinese economy is cooling very quickly. It's 3.9 to 3.4 just in 3 months, so basically over the summer. It's significant drop. What this means, fixed asset investment, is basically investment in capex in future productive capabilities. So this means that businesses in China don't want to invest in increasing or maintaining, let's say, maintaining probably stretch, but more of increasing in productive capacity. So basically, they're not building factories, or they reducing amount of spend they used to spend on building new factories, new new production capacity. So this is what this really reflects. And because you spend less on increasing production capabilities, that really also means that you spend less on sort of downstream, right? You're buying less steel, you're buying less cement, you're buying less of everything, right? Less equipment, manufacturing equipment, and so on, machine building tools. So this will in turn will hit probably Germany, will hit Japan, will hit South Korea, and so on, because they typically supply those machines for those factories. Also, as you can see, and this is all tied to this, industrial production is going down to 4.5% from 5.1, and if we look prior to that, it was 5.1, 5.3. So again, pretty significant drop, and this is all tied together, right? If your industrial production is going down, then you're not going to build new factories. So it makes the whole two numbers make sort of perfect sense. And then also retail sales are going down from 2.7 to 2.1, quite sharp move down. It's not to say that consumer was driver of Chinese economy. It's not, but even from that data point, you can see that consumer is not doing well in China, and sort of basically trying to save money, and that's what's really happening, and that really reflects consumers' view on the general economy and where everything is going in China, which is generally from these numbers is negative. Also, this is another data point that supports this whole story is unemployment rate. It went a little bit up to 5.3%. As we can see, in June it used to be 5, so it's a very clear trend here. Also 0.3% over 3 months. So again, that's really sort of supported by this retail sales. Is people, few people working, people less, they more concerned about their job security. They tend to spend less, and because they want to sort of save for the rainy day. So as you can see, this it's a coherent picture of very negative situation developments in Chinese economy. It's very clear it's not going to be locomotive of the world economy. It's definitely losing its steam. As I said before, Chinese leadership decided switching to the back to export driven model, and I've shown, you can see here very positive export numbers for August, but at the same time it's not enough to compensate this whole basically problems with this is all driven by real estate and sort of not really popping, but deflation of real estate bubble in China mostly, and obviously deflation of the consumer bubble in China. That is basically they're two of they I'd say interconnected vessels. That's probably the best way to explain how they work. Because if your real estate goes up in value, then consumer is more willing to borrow and spend. So that's just really how that whole that cycle happens. So that really is essentially dead in China. And going back to what I stated, is this allows China, this exports, they allow China to stay afloat from completely going into complete economic implosion, and effectively this hopefully prevents Chinese government from becoming much more militaristic and more aggressive, because if things are really going poorly internally, economy wise, you have social unrest. Typical governments does two things. It's either social unrest or external, or channeling this unrest and negative energy externally, basically starting a war with other country, in this case Taiwan. So the general situation is definitely China is going in a negative direction, but the positive sort of caveat to this is that export model is still working, and that hopefully prevents China from going into extremely negative scenario of invading Taiwan, which may still happen, but hopefully there's a little bit of barrier towards that. Now let's move to the situation in Ukraine, and I'm gonna do a walkthrough in a clockwise fashion. As a general summary, things becoming bleaker and bleaker in Ukraine, for Ukrainian for Ukrainian citizens and the country as a whole, because even this incursion into the Kursk region, it starts to fall apart. And let's actually look at the situation. So Russian troops counterattacked. I've shown that in a prior video, and they continuing their advance. So they managed to establish control of this sort of 3 or 4 villages along this road, from Korenivo to basically Ukrainian border, and now they're advancing. There are some reports that they're already controlling this Lubimovka, and also potentially Tolsty Lug, and actually these 3 villages. So not 100% clear, but one thing is clear, that they are continuing their advance. So this is from the western direction. At the same time, Russian troops started attacking from this southeastern direction. They basically trying to, from flanks, essentially just eliminate this, call it bridgehead, and effectively force withdrawal of Ukrainian forces that are furthest away from Ukrainian border, by basically creating credible threat that they will be cut off from Ukraine. And obviously Sudzha is sort of the key hub, key logistical point at this moment. So it's still, it's not immediately threatened, but that's the end goal of this whole Russian attack, is to basically squeeze from the flanks and eventually come as close as possible to Sudzha, where they have at least artillery control, and really collapses the whole Ukrainian bridgehead in Kursk region. So this is where this is kind of developing and going so far. There was some intelligent response from Ukrainian command, where they attacked from where I show it. They captured village Vesala, and direction objective is this town Lushkovo, with the idea that this will create threat and into the rear of this attacking Russian units, and also potentially cut them off through this, because they depend on pontoon bridges for resupply. At this point, actually not exactly, but largely still they are, and so in hopefully physically cut off attacking Russian troops from their supply zones. The problem is that Russian command had enough resources to stop this advance. So Ukrainian forces were stopped somewhere north of this village Vesela, and they could not make to Hlushkova. So I would say that this scenario is unlikely to play out, and so Russian troops will continue pressuring Ukrainian bridgehead from the flanks, and eventually probably it will collapse, which will have very negative political outcome in Ukraine. So again, this whole idea that I stated before initially that this didn't have any strategic goal, and so this will sort of be doomed for negative outcome. This is prior look of this whole situation. This is the sort of first day of attacks where Russian troops basically initially pushed Ukrainian forces. And this is prior to the attacks. So you can see this was sort of Ukrainian sort of flank here, and basically Ukrainian troops did not even build any meaningful defensive positions, so it's not surprised that they were pushed so easily. Now let's move south. Let's see what's going on near northeast of Kharkiv, and things here are stable. Again, both, as I stated before, both sides don't have resources to do anything meaningful here. Now let's look at the North Lugansk front line. Russian troops continuing their push, but without significant sort of advances. The only sort of meaningful advance is that Russian forces are getting closer to this village Lushkivka, basically to the Skil River, which is definitely negative. At the same time, it's not the end of the world, given what's going on the other sections of the front line. This is least of the worries for Ukraine. Now let's look at North Donbass section of the front line. Things here more or less under control, at least for now, especially in the northern sector. And sort of similar situation in the southern, a little bit more difficult, but Ukrainian forces still holding on in Chasiv Yar and still preventing Russian forces from making major advances. As I explained, one of the main reasons is that Russian command had to sort of borrow some of the units, including from this area as well, to attack Ukrainian forces in Kursk region. Now let's look at central Donbass front line, where the front line is really collapsing. So this is a big picture, and I'm gonna focus on the situation south of Selidove, where sort of Russian command is pursuing sort of low-hanging fruit, immediate goal of clearing this whole area from Ukrainian troops. So this is, and I just want to mention, there is not much happen north of Selidove, so apparently all of the sort of resources and focus of Russian command is focused on the situation south of Selidove, where Russian troops captured this town Ukrainsk. They captured village Zhelanne Pershe. So this, it's not shown from the map, but this is Zhelanne Druhe, or basically, so this is Zhelanne, sort of first Zhelanne, and this is second Zhelanne. I don't know if it makes sense in terms of names, kind of strange, but so this is sort of last cornerstone that allows this bottleneck to be open and allows Ukrainian forces to get out through this very, at this point, narrow, probably 2 kilometers, maybe up to 3 kilometers wide bottleneck from all of this, from this area west of Nevelsk. Essentially, Ukrainian forces are forced to retreat or be trapped in the encirclement. Also, Russian troops managed to make quick advance all the way to Gostre, and actually, I cannot say they fully control this town, but they control majority of it. So this whole front line collapsed here. So very quickly, as you can see, it was a quick jump from Krasnohorivka to Gostre. Gostre just in one day. you can imagine that Ukrainian defensive lines are really not holding well at all. It's, I would say, in chaos. In general assessment of this whole situation in a central Donbass, it's on the verge of major collapse. So at this point, the question is, will Ukrainian forces manage to quickly to escape this encirclement, or they actually will be, some of the units will be encircled there? This is really the question right now. And otherwise, it's very clear that the defensive line will just, this whole area of this towns, Zirny, Kurakhivka, Alexandropol, Vovchenka, Zoryane, everything is going to get lost pretty quickly. And the front line was probably going to go from Tsukurina all the way south to Ilinka. Essentially, this whole area will be lost, and Russian troops will also advance pretty quickly towards Kurakhove. So this is sort of immediate loss, but this really just the beginning, the way it looks. This is prior, as you can see, this is how the situation looked during prior video, except I did not update Nevelsk at that time. It was lost already then. So Ukrainian forces already started retreating from Nevelsk at that time. This is north of Selidovich. As I stated, there were not much of developments there. One other area where it's becoming also very unglued and defensive line, the defensive line is in big trouble, is around Vuhledar. As you can see, Ukrainian forces retreated on the northern side of this stream. But the bigger problem is that Russian forces managed to capture village Vodyane and actually advancing even further west of it. I would say in this area where I'm showing that at this time they're probably there already. They also captured a very important stronghold, this coal mine called Pivdenno-Ukrainska. And they really captured it without much of a resistance. So again, going back to what I was saying, that defensive line is collapsing because there is lack of motivated soldiers on Ukrainian side, and that's very simple and straightforward answer. It's not problem of equipment. There is no problem of Russian troops are becoming anything different. They are of the same quality used to be. Really problem of motivation on Ukrainian side among Ukrainian soldiers, and I explained in previous videos what's going on there. It's definitely deeply rooted in a political situation in Ukraine and political problems, and Ukraine as a system that's not working for ordinary citizens. So, and that's really the crux of the problem, and if that's not going to get resolved, this front line will collapse all the way to Dnipro River. Now let's look at the situation on the Zaporizhya front line. So this is Vuhledar, where I just showed it needs to be a little bit updated. Things got worse here, but this is the sort of big picture. Otherwise, there's not much going on Zaporizhya front line. Again, for the same reason I explained before, Russian command is pulled resources from this area to put pressure in Kursk region and also in central Donbass. Now let's finish with the situation along the Dnipro River. Again, also everything is quiet because this is sort of donor front line for the rest, for other sections of the front line. That's it for today. Thanks for watching. Till next time. Bye-bye.